Hi everyone and welcome to the GMHBA Healthier at Home Lunchtime webinar series. Today is our third and final instalment. I'm Amy Gillett and I'm the Prevention and Community Manager at GMHBA, and I'm delighted to have you join me for today's webinar. Before we begin the session, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, wherever that may be for you. For me, I acknowledge the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to elders past and present. The way today will work is that we'll have a presentation from our speaker, and if you have a question as we go through, feel free to type it in the chat function at the bottom of the screen, and we'll address the questions at the end of the session. We'll have a good amount of time for conversation and questions at the end. Today's session will run for about 45 minutes. At the end of the webinar, we'll conduct a short poll. This is really important as it helps us to inform future healthier at home and preventative health programs at GMHBA. So if you can, I encourage you to stay around until the end and fill that out. So now on to today. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Kate Gregorevic. Hi, Kate. Kate's a geriatrician and internal medicine physician who works in acute hospital medicine and community settings in Melbourne. And Kate, I must say a big thank you for giving up your time today. No doubt work is very hectic with you, along with the lockdown that you're in at the moment. So we really appreciate you giving up your time today. Lifestyle medicine is a core feature of Kate's clinical practice, and nutrition, exercise and sleep are integral to developing plans to optimise her patients' health. Kate has published extensively, including in the Sydney Morning Herald, The Age, News.com, Women and Mamamia networks. She's been heard on ABC Breakfast Radio and 3AW. Kate's also recently published her first book titled Staying Alive, which explores the science of living healthier, happier and longer. She's also launched Project 3612, a provider of at-home exercise and wellbeing programs designed to give women over 40 the tools they need to improve strength and vitality for long-term sustainable health. Great idea for her at the moment, I'd say. Kate lives in Melbourne with her husband and 3 children. So today's webinar is titled Immediate Motivation: How Physical Activity Can Improve Your Wellbeing Today. And we'll explore the reasons to start being active today and the motivation to continue into the future. So something I think is very relevant for all of us at the moment. So now I'll hand over to you. Thanks, Kate.
Thank you for the introduction. So thank you also all for joining me today virtually. This is a nice, exciting breakup in my stage 4 lockdown. So today I'm going to be talking about exercise and why this is fantastic for our long-term health, but what the best reasons are for starting it today. So I want you to start by asking yourselves, what does healthy aging mean to you? To me, when I see my patients in their 80s and 90s, I get so much inspiration. I see people who lived so many decades of life, who are still really mentally engaged, who are still physically capable of doing what they want to do, who are still making friends, who are still learning new ideas. And this is what I want for my years ahead. And exercise is an absolutely key strategy for this. Exercise has incredible benefits for our longer term health. People who exercise actually decrease the risk of dying, and it also has direct positive impacts on some of the cellular processes of aging. And this science is absolutely fascinating, and it's a talk in and of itself, but I'll just run through it briefly. Exercise seems to have an impact on some of the changes in the way our cells function. It seems to enhance our ability to repair our DNA, which can get damaged with age. Exercise also has really fascinating effects on our immune function, and a higher level of baseline inflammation is associated with frailty or with a lot of age-related diseases. So that's one of the ways that exercise having a positive impact on immune control is probably letting us live a longer and healthier life. The other thing exercise does, it has a positive impact on our metabolism. It makes us better able to manage our glucose load, so decreasing our risk of diabetes. What does this mean for you as a person? So Many studies have shown that in terms of dementia prevention, exercise is one of the best tools we have. In older adults, or in study of people with an average age of 73, basically the fitter people were correlated with how good their cognitive function was. So just being fit, being active is really good for your brain. In another study that followed women for around 4 decades, they recruited these women when they were aged 30 to 60, so in midlife, measured their aerobic fitness, and then did cognitive testing over all the following years. In this group, the fittest women at the end of the study had a 5% risk of dementia compared to the least fit women who had a 32% risk of dementia. And not only were the fittest women much less likely to get dementia, they also got it at a later age. So it's living longer and living healthier into that old age. The other thing exercise is so important for is bone and muscle strength. One condition which has a huge impact on quality of life is sarcopenia, which is a loss of muscle strength and function. Now, I think when we're younger, we sometimes don't stop and think about how fantastic our muscle strength and function is. But when I'm 90, I want to be able to get out of my low chair easily enough. I want to be able to steady myself if I look like I'm going to fall. That's why maintaining muscle strength is so important. Our muscles and our bones also work together. When our muscles are getting a load, it also tells our bones they need to get stronger because bone is a living dynamic tissue. So exercise can be really good for preventing osteoporosis, which can be incredibly disabling because it can cause minimal trauma fractures. But exercise also is good for your blood pressure. So maintaining a good blood pressure in midlife is again key for healthy aging, particularly for dementia prevention. But all of these things are in the future. And let's face it, the future is abstract. The future is a little uncertain. And sometimes this can be a bit of a barrier to making these positive behavior changes that we know we need to do, but are very tempted to put off until tomorrow. So the thing with exercise though, these future benefits are fantastic. But for me, the thing that gets me exercising every day, the thing that keeps me really active is actually the impact it has on the here and now. And I think these things are far more motivating. So one of the most positive impacts that exercise has is on mood. Now, exercise is a fantastic way of buffering stress. And I think for a lot of us, it's an incredibly stressful time at the moment. And when we are stressed, if you think about watching a movie like Jurassic Park, when the Tyrannosaurus Rex is stalking the children, our hearts beat faster, our breathing speeds up, we tense our muscles and sit on the edge of our seat. We're getting ready for a physical response, for a need to run away from this Tyrannosaurus Rex, even though cognitively we know it's not actually going to come out of the TV and get us. And at the moment, I think a lot of people, because of this coronavirus pandemic, we're experiencing similar levels of heightened stress activity without really a physical outlet for it to go, because to stay safe, we need to just stay home. And so exercise is a fantastic way to buffer that. So by exercising, we let off some of those neurological and hormonal changes that come from stress, and that can help us to relieve that stress. In terms of more serious, when the prolonged stress can of course be a risk factor for getting depression and anxiety. And exercise in itself there's so much evidence for that it's recommended by the Royal Australian College of Psychiatrists as a treatment for mild to moderate depression. Sometimes sometimes I do use antidepressants to treat my patients, but I will also always recommend starting an exercise program for people who can, because this has got such good evidence behind it as something to improve mood. The other thing that happens when we exercise is that we improve blood flow to our brain. We get changes in our patterns of neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters are chemicals that go from one brain cell to the next that alter the way these brain cells are working. They'll tell some brain cells to turn on and be more active, some to settle down. And so we'll talk about that endorphin high we get when we exercise. And it is actually measurable in the blood that we get some changes. But it's actually a lot more complex than that. We've got a whole lot of different things going on. And these neurochemical changes in the brain are why we get such a potent mood boost from doing exercise. The other thing that exercise is really good for is actually our thinking in the here and now. And so between being on the coronavirus wards, between assisting my husband in running our homeschool/daycare, I didn't get to prepare for this talk as much as I would have liked. So this morning, instead of reading my notes again, I went for a brisk walk for an hour, because I know that, again, that blood flow to my brain, those changes in the neurotransmitters are going to help me think more clearly to hopefully be able to do a better job and remember the information I wanted to tell you. And there's evidence to back this up. In some animal studies, they found that doing even one burst of exercise increased activity in the hippocampus. The hippocampi are two structures in the brain, so they're just shaped, you've got a curve shape, and they're critical for memory. Basically, if you don't have them working, you can't make new memories. And so what happens when we exercise is these become more active and help enhance our memory. In studies of humans, they took one group and told them either to do exercise/cognitive training or nothing. The group who did both exercise and exercise/cognitive training had an improvement in their memory function over 6 weeks. So it's this short-term way of boosting the way our brains are working, which I think is such an important way of getting the most out of life. Exercise is also a really great thing for self-efficacy. And so I think all of us go through times when it can feel like, one of the things that can get us down a little bit is, we've got a big project on at work that we feel like we might not be making progress. We feel like our homeschool's not going that well. Going out, doing a session of exercise can have that really great mood boost of helping you feel like you've actually achieved something. It can be a way of saying to yourself, look what I've done today. I've actually gotten somewhere. I've achieved something, made my day a little bit better. And the last thing that I want to talk about in terms of the immediate benefits is getting stronger. And this seems like a fairly simple thing. As I said earlier, one of the things that can have a really key impact on healthy aging is the loss of muscle strength and function. And one slightly scary statistic is that inactivity is the biggest cause of later life disability in our society. Now, one of the most important types of exercise that most people don't do is strength training. So only around 1 in 5 people do it, a bit less for women, and the numbers drop off with age. And this is a problem. While we think going to the gym and lifting weights as something for young men to get big arm muscles, it's actually hugely important, particularly for women, to maintain our function into later life. As we age, we lose muscle strength. And they talk about from the 40s onwards losing 5% of muscle mass a decade. And over a long enough period of time, this does have very serious implications for independent function, and particularly for women, since women start off with a lower peak muscle mass to begin with. Now, even in people who are already really frail, doing exercise will help to strengthen your muscles. And so starting it even earlier means you've got an even higher baseline to come off. And this is one way that you can really enhance your longer term health. But it's also something that's incredibly satisfying. And when they've looked at studies of people starting strength training, they found that people derive motivation from making these gains. And so people who didn't used to be able to, when you think about lifting garden pots, when you think about lifting small children, carrying your washing out, all these small things, which are so fantastic for enjoying life, can be improved even in a fairly short period of time, like 6 to 12 weeks, by starting some resistance training. And so what should an exercise program look like? The current guidelines are it should be at least 150 minutes a week, which is really not that much when you think of it, only 30 minutes a day. And it talks about it being moderate to high intensity exercise. So a good rule of thumb for aerobic exercise is that it should be fast enough or intense enough that you're finding you're getting a bit too puffed to easily carry on a conversation. The other thing to include is at least 2 sessions a week of strength training and resistance training. And again, this can be something that there are a few more barriers to getting started, but it's something that doing it has such incredible health benefits. The other thing which I think an exercise program should be is fun. And as I said, my primary reason why I exercise every day, why I'm so active, is that it puts me in a better mood. It makes me more patient. It makes me think more clearly, makes me feel sharper, and I really enjoy it. And I know that on the days when I'm feeling least like it are the days I'm going to benefit the most. So other tips for getting started. Number one, if you haven't done much exercise or you're looking at increasing the intensity, focusing on technique is really important. And one thing I've learned from working with exercise physiologists is that it's really important to learn to do things properly rather than trying to exercise to the point of exhaustion. And I think that's something that you exercise to exhaustion, you're not able to focus on technique, increased risk of injuries, and it can actually make it harder to keep it going in the long term rather than starting at a slow and steady pace and building strength. The other thing is making it part of your routine. So simple things like writing on a whiteboard. My husband and I write on a whiteboard when we're going to do our exercise that week, and we make each other stick to it. The other thing, focusing on the gains. So focusing on how much better you feel and what you're able to do when you start a program. Another key strategy is making it social, which is obviously quite challenging at the moment, but there are some ways around it, like queuing up with a friend to do your online program at the same time, chatting over the phone while you do it. Or one of my favorites at the moment is when I go for a long walk, I put my AirPods in and call a friend. So we're getting our social time and our exercise together. And the last message I want to leave you with today is that there's no point living as long as possible if we're not enjoying life as much as possible. Exercise is an absolutely key strategy to getting the most out of life in the here and now. And that's why I think it's so important not to wait till tomorrow for those longer term health benefits, but to start getting the health benefits today. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Kate. So many great tips and ideas for us all in being able to keep active. And, you know, I think it's one of those things that we all find you do feel so much better when you get out and get active, but sometimes the challenge is just getting out the door and making that start. We have a question from one of our panelists, from one of our guests today. And that question is, do you have any ideas on how to motivate parents or in-laws, those who are over 75, to be more active?
Yeah, and so this group, a group I often work with, there are sometimes some challenges. Sometimes people have never done exercise or never been particularly active. And so there's a bit of a barrier of habit to overcome. But one thing, when I'm working with my patients and helping people make lifestyle changes is a really key part of my role. And of course, I'm very lucky that I've often got access to physiotherapists and exercise physiologists. But what I often do is I start by asking people what's important to them, what they like to do and what their goals are. So getting people to think about what's important to them, what they value. And often it might be spending time with family, or they want to go on a holiday and be able to be really active and engaged in the holiday, and using that as a framework to motivate people. I'm very much about motivating through hope and positivity rather than, I guess, holding a stick over people.
Yeah, excellent. Great tips. Now we have a couple of other questions that have come in. So Marie's asking, and this is a really good one, and particularly I think if we're starting off, how do you find a good exercise physiologist, or what would you recommend to look out for if you're looking to work with an EP?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So you've got a lot of trainers out there who've done a certificate 3 or 4, which is just a couple of weeks really of training to become a personal trainer. An exercise physiologist is someone who's done a degree in prescribing exercise. So they're working at a different level. And for people, particularly people who aren't as young anymore, it can be really good to see someone who will actually be able to focus on you, focus on what your needs are, and focus on helping you develop some strength. And this is where, as I said, and particularly people who've got other medical problems or who've got something like osteoarthritis. And so there's ESSA is the Exercise Physiology Association, which is Exercise Scientists Society of Australia, I believe. That's a good place to start looking for somebody. And as I said, it's a very different framework of working out. But, you know, as I said, I wouldn't recommend seeing someone who's trying to push you beyond your limits, trying to push you to do just one more when you're really fatigued, because that's the way it makes it easier to get injured rather than building up long-term sustainable strength, which is what we really want.
Definitely. Like you said before, those long-term gains that you get from having that strength into later life, which is great. Now, Naren's asked if there's, how do we stay motivated during lockdown? So you've talked about some of the things that you're doing, but it's really hard when it, like you said, it is such a social thing. So you listed a couple of tips before. Are there any other tips that you have that you'd like to add to the mix of how we can stay motivated? because it gets
Yeah.
hard, especially in.
Look, oh, look, it certainly does get hard. For me, the reason I've been so motivated to keep active and keep up my exercise routine through lockdown is the benefits on my mood. And as I said, in lockdown, it's incredibly stressful and for everybody. And then we're being asked to stay home with that stress. We can't do the things we normally do, like reach out to each other, gather together. You know, think about after the bushfires, there were all these gatherings like concerts and things, and we just can't do some of these things. And so I think focusing on those mood benefits that come from exercise is one thing that's really helpful. And the other thing is just making it part of the routine. And for a lot of us, you know, I still go to work, obviously, but a lot of people don't go to work. And so we're losing the normal structure of our day. For people with families, you know, making it part of the family time. So whether it's family bike rides, or even sometimes when I take my kids to the park, I'll do a workout, you know, do some star jumps, do some running on the spot while they're playing. And so squeezing it into our days whenever we can. And I think as well, just, you know, setting times in the calendar and saying, this is when I'm doing it, and pushing yourself to do it.
Yeah, so making it like any other sort of meeting or appointment you might have in the calendar. It's a great tip. The question we've got from a vet is, and this is a really interesting one, and I think particularly at the moment with coronavirus, and I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this, is will being more active help with immunity? Does that help if...
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's such an interesting question. There's some evidence, and it's a bit variable, that people who do extreme amounts of exercise, like Ironman triathlons, that may increase your risk of getting colds and things. But it's hard to know exactly how much being active is going to boost your immunity per se. The exercise has really interesting effects on immunity, which is probably part of why it's so good for long-term effects. So one thing that exercise does is it damps down baseline levels of immune activity. And so what we want is an immune system that's able to jump into gear when we get an infection, but we want other times, we want it to be sitting there quite quietly. And so within that, it's hard to, as I said, it's hard to know exactly what effect it's going to have on us getting sick. There's certainly no downside to being really active for your immune system. And so, you know, for the levels of activity which I assume most people here are doing, it's probably protective against coughs and colds. That's not, but as I said, it's hard to know, but I think the longer term benefits are a bit clearer.
Yeah, really interesting stuff. Now, for some of us, some people might be active already and some might not be. So what about if I'm new to exercise, or I'm watching today and I go, right, today's the day I'm going to get out and active? What are some easy ways to sort of start bringing physical activity in and making it part of your routine?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question. And so basically, if you're doing nothing, doing anything is better. If you're doing something, then obviously working at increasing the intensity. And so starting with just simple things like walking is a fantastic place to start. We sort of underestimate that. The other part of it, as I said, if ideally integrating some strength training. And so when we're talking about a really, really optimal program for healthy aging, it would include some fairly intensive aerobic exercise. It would also include a bit of impact, because impact is really good for our bones. But to do, and I do some high intensity interval training, which is doing short bursts of very high intensity with some breaks between, which is an efficient way to get exercise, but not something I would suggest starting with. So as I said, for people who are wanting to make a start, it really is making those slow and steady changes, finding preferably a social group, or at least a social online group to do it with, and working up to getting things to be more intense.
Yeah, that's great. Now we've still got some time, so I really encourage, if you do have any questions, pop them in the Q&A section there, and we'll be able to answer them. One of the things I'll just point out while we're waiting to see if we get any, while people are putting in their questions there, is on our GMHBA Healthier at Home web page, we've got lots of resources there about places where you can go to find physical activity, lots of ideas and other things there. So I really encourage you to jump online and take a look at that for some resources. So if anybody does have questions, feel free to pop them in. I'm just going to have a look here. We've got, so I guess really what we've talked about in terms of, and one of the things that comes up a lot is those barriers to being active. So this time of year, winter, lockdown, it's all really hard. But like you said, routine, book it in the calendar, make it part of your daily plan, integrate it family. Any other tips?
Yeah, I think that, you know, people sometimes ask me what's the one most important thing to do for staying healthy. And it's, you know, like trying to choose a favorite child. I think a really good way to look at it is exercise is a keystone in what we do. Exercise is part of a cluster of health behaviors. And so, you know, as an example, sleep is really important. And I know that a lot of people's sleep's been affected by all the stress at the moment. And so exercise does enhance the quality of sleep. But then people who've had a good sleep also feel more motivated to exercise. And so these things can all really work together. And similarly with nutrition, healthy eating is also a great boost for mood. And I think if you're exercising, you feel a little bit more motivated to eat well, particularly if you're getting attuned to your own ups and downs and how you're feeling.
So it all ties in together, doesn't it?
Yes.
Now we've got another question here. What sort of strength training would you recommend for people?
Yeah. So I think the key, as I said, women in particular face real barriers to strength training, and women often feel intimidated by the gym session. They don't know how to use the equipment properly. And a key part of maintaining strength training is doing it in a way that helps to build confidence, helps people to know what they're doing. And so with this, either finding a trainer who can guide you through it, who can teach you how to do things properly, or for people who feel too shy to go to a gym, there's some online programs available as well. And again, finding something that is, particularly if you haven't done strength training before, finding something specific to your own age group and your own needs is a really good way to start.
Excellent. And I think too, you mentioned ESSA before as the exercise physiology body. I think they've also got some great resources on their website too that would be helpful for people to have a look at if they're getting started. So that's great. Now, I think that just about wraps it up for questions today. Kate, did you have anything that you'd like to leave everyone with before we close out today's session?
No, just want to say thank you everyone for joining us. It's nice to break up my stage 4 lockdown, and I hope people found the talk useful. As I said, if people want to look at some more resources, they can come to my website.
Excellent. And your website, we'll pop that up for people after today's webinar. But if you want to just quickly let people know your website.
Yeah, so it's called Project 3612. So just www.project3612, and the letters, the numbers are written in letters, .com. So yeah.
We'll make sure that everybody who's attended today gets that as well.
Thank you.
And one other last question that we've had there is in regards to your book.
Yeah.
Whereabouts can people get your book from?
So it's available widely. It's lots of bookstores. It's online on Amazon, so Dimix, Target, many different places.
Excellent. That's great. Thank you so much for today's session, Kate. It's been great, and it's just sometimes just so important to get that extra motivation and just to chat to someone to get those good tips in how we can keep active or get active. So thank you once again. From here, I guess one of the things we've talked about being active. So I guess after today's session, if you do have the opportunity, get up, have a stretch, maybe do some squats. If you've got time, go for a walk. You know, if I look out the window here, it's looking okay for me at the moment. But put into practice what Kate's told us about today. We've got a few poll questions to finish up with. So they're going to pop up on your screen now. If I can just get you to quickly read through those and answer those questions, we'll leave them up for a moment. This is the last in our Healthy at Home webinar series. So we hope you've really enjoyed it, the last three that we've hosted over the last 3 weeks. If you want to keep up to date with other events and activities that GMHBA are running, make sure you follow us on Facebook and Instagram, because that's often where we'll place a lot of the new activities as they pop up. Also, if you're a member, making sure that in your member portal that your preferences are set to make sure that you get the emails that we send out regularly as well. So looks like we're getting lots of people filling out our survey now, so we'll end that one now. Thank you all for your input. As I said, that really helps us to I guess how we direct the work that we do for you in the future. So thanks again for joining us. Thanks again, Kate, and have a great afternoon, everyone. Get out there and